I kneel in the snow, and the blood on my gauntlets has already begun to freeze. The wind tears across the tundra with teeth of ice, but I barely feel it. My ceramite armor regulates temperature, keeps my enhanced body in perfect equilibrium, but that is not why the cold does not touch me. It is because something else burns beneath my skin, something that has burned there for so long now that I have forgotten what it feels like to be without it. The wolf. Always the wolf. The blood is not mine. It belongs to the elk thing we hunted across these wastes, a creature with too many legs and eyes that glowed with bioluminescence in the perpetual twilight of Fenris. We brought it down 3 kilometers back, tore through its thick hide with chain blade and fang. I say fang because when the kill moment came, I cannot recall if it was my blade or my teeth that found its throat first. The line blurs more with each hunt. I lift my hand and watch the crimson ice crystals catch the weak light of Fenris's distant sun. The blood looks black against the grey ceramite, beautiful in a way that should disturb me. It does not. That troubles me more than the blood itself. My hearing picks up the heartbeat of a creature 9 kilometers to the east. Steady, strong, prey rhythm, not predator rhythm. I know this without thinking, the same way I know which direction is north, the same way I know the weight of my bolter without looking at it. The Canis Helix has rewritten everything, replaced the fumbling uncertainty of human senses with something far more precise and infinitely more dangerous. I can smell the fear musk of a herd animal carried on the wind. Not the elk thing we already killed, but something else. Something that knows a predator is near. The scent triggers something deep in my chest, below the fused ribcage and the second heart. A hunger. Not for food, though my metabolism burns through calories like a forge consumes promethium. This is something older, something that has nothing to do with sustenance, and everything to do with the chase, the hunt, the moment when living flesh becomes dead meat beneath your hands. The beast stirs. That is what we call it, those of us who still have enough humanity left to recognize what we have become. The beast. The wolf inside the man. The Canis Helix awakening from its restless sleep to remind us that we are not conquerors of our savage nature, but merely its temporary wardens. I cannot remember my human name. This should horrify me. I know this intellectually, the same way I know that the Emperor sits upon the golden throne on Far Terra, the same way I know that Lehman Russ was our Primarch and father. I know that every human being treasures their name, that it is the foundation of identity, the proof that you exist as something separate from the pack. But when I reach for that name, there is only fog and the smell of burning. I remember fire. I remember pain. I remember drinking from a cup that tasted of copper and wolf musk and ancient rage. What remains is the pack name. Grimjaw, they call me now. Given after my first true combat, when I tore through a traitor's helmet with my teeth because my blade was broken and the beast would not be denied. The wolf guard who witnessed it laughed and clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to crack unaugmented bone. Grimjaw, he said, a proper name for a blood claw with spirit. I wear it now like a collar, like a brand, like the truth of what I have become. The wind shifts, and my auto-senses catalogue 1,000 details in the span of a heartbeat. The chemical composition of the air, the distant ozone smell of a storm building over the northern peaks, the musk of my pack brothers, scattered across the tundra in a hunting formation that required no spoken orders, because we think as one entity now, separate bodies guided by a single predatory intelligence. This is what they do not tell you when the sky warriors descend from the stars and select you from among your tribe. They speak of honor. They speak of duty to the All-Father and the God-Emperor of mankind. They speak of the glory of serving in the Space Wolves, the Emperor's executioners, the hunters who stalk the enemies of humanity across the void. They do not speak of the cost. They do not tell you that the transformation will hollow you out, scrape away everything that made you human, and fill the empty space with something that wears your face but hungers with an appetite you cannot name. They do not tell you that you will kneel in the snow one day, centuries from now, and realize you cannot recall your mother's voice, or your father's face, or the name you carried for the first 16 years of your life. They do not tell you that the glory is a lie we tell ourselves to justify what has been done to us. The heartbeat to the east skips. The prey has sensed something, perhaps caught my scent on the changing wind. It begins to run. I can hear the percussion of its hooves against the frozen ground, the panicked acceleration of its pulse. The beast inside me surges forward, demanding, insistent, inevitable. I should return to the fang. The hunt is over. We have meat for the feast hall and honor enough for one day. But the Canis Helix does not care about should or reason or duty. It cares only about the next hunt, the next kill, the next moment when the man surrenders and the wolf is allowed to run free. This is not glory. This is hunger wrapped in duty, fang wrapped in faith, and the slow, terrible understanding that I am not the warrior who wields the beast. I am the cage that holds it, and the bars grow weaker with each passing year. I force myself to remember, though the memories slip through my thoughts like water through a clenched fist. There was a village. I know this because I can still see flashes of it when I close my eyes during the brief hours we are permitted sleep. Rough-hewn timber and stone, built into the side of a cliff face to shelter from the winds that could flay flesh from bone. Fenris is a death world, and survival there is not a given but a daily victory earned through strength and cunning, and the simple animal refusal to lie down and die. I was 16 winters old when the Sky Warriors came. 16 winters on Fenris is not the same as 16 years on softer worlds. By that age, I had killed my first ice bear, survived 2 culling seasons when the weak were cast out to feed the kraken things in the dark waters, and earned my place among the hunters of my clan. I was proud. The pride of youth, the certainty that I was strong and clever and favored by the gods we worshipped then, before I understood that there was only one God-Emperor and that even he was failing. We called ourselves the Stone Kin, and we held the northern reaches of the territory my people knew as the world. We did not know then that Fenris was but one planet among millions, that the Imperium stretched across the stars in ways our minds could not compass. The world was everything: the sea, the ice, the mountains, the endless struggle against the things that crawled up from the deep waters during the summer thaw. I remember the taste of Mjod by firelight, the honey burn of it, the way it warmed the belly after a successful hunt. We would gather in the feast hall, 20 or 30 of us, and the elders would tell the old stories. Stories of Russ, the Wolf King, who descended from the heavens and united the tribes in ages past. Stories of the Sky Warriors who came to take the strongest sons, to carry them to the mountain fortress where gods walked among men. Every boy dreamed of being chosen. I dreamed of it with an intensity that burned brighter than the hearth fire. There was a girl. I can almost see her face now, if I concentrate hard enough, push past the static and the wolf thoughts. Dark hair, I think. Eyes the color of storm clouds. She laughed at something I said once, a joke I can no longer recall, and the sound of it made me feel like I had slain a dragon. I wanted to give her something, proof of my worth. I brought her the pelt of a snow fox, white as death and soft as cloud. She touched my hand when she took it. I cannot remember her name. The Sky Warriors came during a raid. The Fireblood clan had encroached on our hunting grounds, killed 3 of our scouts and taken their weapons. We gathered our strength and marched to their settlement under cover of the winter dark. I was there when the violence began, when steel met steel, and the snow turned red with the blood of men I had known since childhood, and men I had never met but now hated with the fierce tribal certainty of youth. The sky opened. That is how it seemed to me, then, as if the gods themselves had torn a wound in the heavens and descended to walk among us. Thunderhawks screaming down through the snow-heavy clouds, massive beyond comprehension, bearing the mark of the wolf and the sign of the All-Father. They landed in the midst of our battle, and warriors emerged who stood twice the height of mortal men, clad in armor the color of storm gray, their eyes burning with an intensity that made me want to weep and roar and kneel all at once. The Space Wolves had come to select new blood. They watched us fight, did not interfere, did not stop the killing, simply watched, as if we were animals performing for their assessment. And we were animals. I understand that now. Clever animals, brutal animals, but animals nonetheless. They were looking for the ones who fought with intelligence and fury in equal measure, who killed efficiently but not cruelly, who protected their pack brothers even in the chaos of melee. I distinguished myself. I do not say this with pride now, but it was pride I felt then. When a fireblood warrior twice my age came at me with an axe, I ducked low, used his momentum against him, opened his belly with my hunting knife. When 3 more rushed my position, I did not run. I called to my bloodkin, and we formed a shield line, held them until they broke. A wolf guard approached me after. I remember looking up at him, my neck craning back to meet eyes that glowed with an unnatural amber light. He was a giant, a god-made flesh, and when he spoke, his voice resonated in my chest like thunder. "You," he said. "What is your name?" I told him, the name I can no longer recall. He nodded once, slowly, as if weighing my soul against some cosmic measure. "You will come with us to the Fang. You will be tested. Most who undertake the trials do not survive. Those who do will never be the same. Do you accept this?" I did not hesitate. "Yes, Lord." I thought I knew what transformation meant. I thought it meant becoming stronger, faster, better. I thought it meant transcending the weakness of mortal flesh and joining the ranks of heroes whose names were carved into legend. I did not know that transformation meant erasure, that to become a space wolf you must first stop being human, that the price of godhood is your humanity, and you will pay it gladly because by the time you understand what you have lost, you will no longer possess the capacity to mourn it. The journey to the Fang took 3 days by Thunderhawk. I pressed my face to the viewport and watched my world fall away beneath me, the village growing smaller and smaller until it vanished into the white expanse. I never saw it again. I do not know if it still stands, or if the sea claimed it during a culling season. I do not know if the girl with storm cloud eyes remembered me, or mourned me, or simply found another hunter to bring her pelts. The Fang rose before us like a fang indeed, a mountain carved into fortress, black stone and ice stretching up toward the stars. I felt awe. I felt terror. I felt the certainty that my life was about to change in ways I could not imagine. I was right. I was so terribly right. They did not give us time to settle into our awe or our fear. Within hours of our arrival, we were stripped of our tribal garments, our weapons, everything that marked us as children of our clans. We stood naked in a chamber carved from black stone, 37 of us, boys who had been warriors and were now less than nothing. The air was thick with incense, a cloying sweetness that could not quite mask the older smells beneath it. Blood, sweat, and something else, something animal and wild that made the hair on my arms stand on end. The rune priests entered first. They wore armor inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at, runes that seemed to writhe and shift when caught at the edge of vision. Their voices rose in a chant, words in a language older than my tribe, older perhaps than Fenris itself. The sound resonated in my chest, made my teeth ache, set something trembling in my bones that had never trembled before. Then came the Wolf Guard. They formed a circle around us, silent sentinels who had survived what we were about to face. I searched their faces for reassurance and found only a terrible solemnity. They were not here to celebrate our ascension. They were here to witness our deaths, or worse, our transformation into something that would make death seem merciful. At the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, and upon it, the cup of Wulfen. It was not golden or jeweled or magnificent in the way I had imagined from the legends. It was old stone, dark and rough-hewn, stained with substances I did not want to name. Steam rose from its rim, and even from across the chamber I could smell what it contained. Copper. Musk. Something that made my stomach turn and my mouth water in equal measure. The wolf priest who led the ceremony spoke, his voice cutting through the chanting like a blade through flesh. "You stand at the threshold," he said. "Beyond this cup lies transformation or oblivion. The gene seed of Leman Russ himself flows within this vessel, the blood right of the space wolves, the gift and the curse that has defined our chapter for 10,000 years. Most of you will not survive. Those who do will never again be what you were. There is no shame in refusal. Step forward now if you would turn back." No one moved. We were 16-year-old boys drunk on legends and too stupid to understand what we were being offered. Death or transformation. We thought transformation was the prize. We did not understand it was another kind of death, slower and more terrible than anything the cup could do to our bodies. They called us forward one by one. I watched the first boy approach the altar, watched him drink from the cup with shaking hands. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his back arched, and the sound that came from his throat was not human. His bones cracked loud enough to echo off the stone walls. He collapsed, convulsing, foam at his lips. The wolf guard moved forward and carried him away. I never learned if he survived. 5 more aspirants. 4 collapsed immediately. 1 seemed to weather it, staggering but standing, until his chest exploded outward in a spray of bone and tissue. His heart had grown too large, too fast. The implantation had failed catastrophically. They called my name, the name I can no longer remember. I walked to the altar on legs that felt like water. The cup was thrust into my hands, still warm from the boy who had drunk before me, still slick with his saliva and perhaps his blood. I looked down into its depths and saw something dark and viscous that seemed to move on its own. I drank. The taste hit me first. Copper and salt and something organic that coated my tongue and throat. I swallowed, felt it slide down into my stomach like living oil. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the pain began. My bones cracked. Not 1 or 2, but all of them at once. A symphony of breaking that filled the chamber. I felt my femurs splinter and expand, felt my ribcage tear itself apart and rebuild into something broader, denser. My spine stretched, vertebrae multiplying, each addition a fresh agony that made me scream until my throat bled. But the physical pain was nothing compared to what happened next. My senses exploded. I could suddenly hear everything. The heartbeat of every person in the chamber, a percussion of life that overwhelmed me with its complexity. I could hear the blood moving through their veins, the air moving through their lungs, the grinding of teeth and the creak of armor, and the whisper of cloth against skin. I could smell decades of accumulated incense in the stone, could smell the fear sweat of the other aspirants, could smell the wolf musk on the wolf guard, and beneath it the residue of 1,000 battles, blood and promethium and death. I fell to my knees, hands pressed against the stone floor, trying to anchor myself in the physical world as my mind threatened to shatter under the sensory assault. And then something else woke up inside me. It rose from somewhere deep in my chest, somewhere below the organs, being reshaped by the gene seed. Not a thought, but an instinct, ancient and primal and absolutely certain. It was hunger. It was rage. It was the accumulated fury of every predator that had ever lived, distilled into a single burning need to hunt, to chase, to kill, to tear living flesh with tooth and claw. The beast, the wolf, the Canis helix awakening for the first time. I felt my mind fracture. Not break, but split, as if something was forcing itself into the space where I lived, demanding room, demanding recognition, demanding dominance. Instincts that were not mine flooded through my consciousness. I knew without thinking which direction the nearest prey lay. I knew without looking which of the other aspirants were weakest, whose throats would tear most easily. I knew the killing bite, the precise angle to snap a spine, the sweet spot below the ribs where a claw could pierce to the heart. I had never killed with a tooth or claw in my life, but the wolf had. 10,000 years of genetic memory, of violence and hunt and pack warfare, all of it suddenly present in my mind like it had always been there. I tried to scream, but the sound that came out was not human. It was a howl, long and mournful, and filled with a grief I did not yet understand. The grief of the man for what he was losing. The joy of the beast for what it was gaining. The wolf guard stepped forward and pressed a hand to my shoulder. The touch anchored me, pulled me back from the edge of the abyss. But I could still feel it there, waiting. The wolf, patient and eternal and inevitable. It would never leave. It would only grow stronger. And one day, perhaps soon, perhaps centuries from now, it would stop waiting and simply take what it had always wanted. Me. Of the 37 who drank from the cup, 11 survived. I was one of them, though in the days that followed, I questioned whether survival was the right word for what had happened to us. They took us to the recovery chambers, cells carved into the living rock of the Fang, where we could scream and convulse and transform in relative isolation. I do not know how long I lay there. Time became meaningless, measured only in waves of agony as my body tore itself apart and rebuilt according to the template written into the gene seed. Bones lengthened, muscle mass doubled, then tripled. New organs grew in cavities that had to be carved out of my existing anatomy. A second heart, additional lungs, glands that would secrete hormones and chemicals I had no name for. But the physical changes were only part of it. The worst transformations happened in my mind, in the spaces between thoughts where the wolf had made its den. When I finally emerged from that cell, I was no longer entirely myself. The training began immediately. They did not give us time to adjust, to learn the parameters of our new bodies. Perhaps that was intentional. Perhaps they wanted to see who would master the change and who would be mastered by it. I shattered my first training blade on the second day. It was supposed to be a simple exercise, basic sword forms, the same patterns I had drilled with wooden practice weapons since I was old enough to hold one. But my hand was no longer my hand. The strength in it was monstrous, and when I brought the blade down in an overhead strike, the steel exploded into fragments that embedded themselves in the training hall walls. The Wolfguard instructor barely glanced at the destruction. "Again," he said, "with control. Control." That became the word that haunted every moment. Control when I walked, because my augmented muscles could propel me forward with enough force to crack stone if I was not careful. Control when I held anything, because my grip could crush steel as easily as I once crushed snow in my mortal hands. Control when I ate, when I spoke, when I breathed, because every action had become a potential catastrophe. I broke 3 more blades that week. I shattered the bones of a sparring partner's arm when I forgot to pull a strike. I put my fist through a wall when frustration overwhelmed discipline. Each failure brought shame, and each shame brought the wolf closer to the surface, feeding on my anger and fear. The other survivors trained alongside me. We were blood claws now, the youngest and most volatile rank of Space Wolf. They struggled with the same challenges: bodies that responded too quickly, strength that exceeded intention, senses that threatened to overwhelm with their clarity and precision. But I began to notice that some adapted faster than others. Some learned to leash the wolf, to channel its fury into disciplined violence. I was not one of them. The first time I lost control completely was during a combat exercise in the 3rd month. We were divided into packs and set against each other in mock battle. Live blades and bolters loaded with training rounds that could still kill if they struck wrong. The Wolf Guard wanted to see how we functioned under pressure, whether the pack instinct would override individual fear. I remember the beginning of the fight. Remember advancing with my pack brothers, bolter raised, scanning for targets. Remember the sharp crack of a training round striking my pauldron, the sting of it even through ceramite. Remember turning toward the source, seeing an aspirant from another pack taking aim for a second shot. Then there is nothing. A hole in my memory, a void where time should be. I came back to awareness standing over the aspirant, my hands wrapped around his throat, his face purple and his eyes bulging. His pack brothers were trying to pull me off, but I was stronger than they were, and the wolf did not want to release its prey. It took 3 Wolf Guard to tear me away, and even then, I fought them, snarling and snapping like the beast I was becoming. When clarity finally returned, I looked down at the aspirant. He was alive, barely, coughing and retching as a wolf priest examined his crushed larynx. The training round that had struck me was still embedded in my armor. I had nearly killed him over a training shot. The Wolf Guard dragged me to an isolation chamber and locked me inside for 2 days. No food, no water, only the darkness and my own thoughts, and the wolf pacing in its den, satisfied with what it had done and eager to do it again. When they released me, my pack brothers looked at me differently. Not with hatred or disgust, but with recognition. They saw in me what they feared in themselves. The beast between heartbeats. The moment of lost control that could turn brother into victim, warrior into murderer. We did not speak of it, but the knowledge hung between us like smoke. We were all walking the same razor's edge. We were all one moment of weakness away from becoming something that would have to be put down. The wolf priests watched us constantly. I understood now why the rune priests were always present during training. Why the Wolf Guard never looked away even when we thought we were alone. They were not there to teach us. They were there to kill us if the transformation went too far. If the wolf consumed the man before the man could learn to cage the wolf. I learned the truth about the Wulfen then. Not from any formal teaching, but from whispered conversations in the darkness. From the way the older space wolves would fall silent when certain topics arose. From the empty chairs in the feast hall that were never removed but never filled. The Wulfen were not legends. They were not ancient history or cautionary tales. They were the future that awaited every one of us. The Canis Helix was not stable. It could not be fully controlled. Some succumbed quickly, within decades. Others held on for centuries. But eventually, inevitably, the wolf would win. The man would fade. Intelligence would drown in instinct. And what remained would be beast wearing the shape of warrior. They did not exile the Wulfen or execute them. They kept them, used them, sent them into the worst battles where their fury could be weaponized. But everyone knew what they were. They were us, just further along the path we all walked. Every heartbeat brought us closer. Every moment of lost control was a step toward that final transformation. And there was no cure, no salvation, no escape. Only the wolf, patient and eternal, waiting for the man to finally stop fighting and surrender to what he had always been destined to become. Months became years, and the years taught me what the cup had truly taken. I survived my training, learned to control the strength, to fight the impulse to destroy everything I touched, learned to function as part of a pack, to trust my brothers even when the wolf inside me saw them as potential rivals. I became a full blood claw, given my armor and my weapons and my place in the great company. They marked my pauldron with the symbol of my pack, and I felt pride at the honor, though the pride was distant, muted, as if I were feeling it through thick cloth. My first campaign came in my 3rd year. We deployed to a hive world whose name I have since forgotten, where cultists had risen in worship of the dark gods and spread their corruption through the lower levels like disease. The fighting was brutal, close quarters combat in darkness so complete that even our enhanced visions struggled. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, excrement, and the sweet sick smell of chaos corruption. I killed my first true enemy in a tunnel beneath the hive. A cultist, his flesh warped by mutation, extra arms sprouting from his torso and eyes that glowed with warp light. He charged me with a crude blade, screaming prayers to gods whose names should not be spoken. I did not use my bolter. The tunnel was too narrow, the risk of hitting my pack brothers too great. Instead, I let the wolf out. It felt like release, like finally scratching an itch that had tormented me for years. I tore into him with my bare hands, felt his ribs crack beneath my fingers, tasted his blood when it splattered across my face. When I came back to myself, he was in pieces, and my pack brothers were staring at me with that same mixture of recognition and wariness I had seen before. But this time, the wolf guard nodded approval. "Good kill, Bloodclaw," he said. "The beast serves the All-Father." I realized then what they had done to us. They had not caged the wolf. They had simply pointed it at the Emperor's enemies and called the resulting slaughter righteous. We fought for 3 months in that hive, cleared level after level, killed thousands of cultists and the things they had summoned from the warp. When we finally emerged, I had lost count of how many I had killed, how many times I had let the beast take control because it was efficient, because it was necessary, because some part of me had begun to crave that release more than anything else. They called it victory. They held a feast in the Fang's great hall, brought out barrels of Jod and platters of meat. I sat with my pack brothers and tried to celebrate, but the food tasted wrong. The cooked meat, carefully prepared and seasoned, tasted like ash in my mouth. The Jod that had once burned so sweetly now barely registered on my altered palate. Only the raw meat satisfied. I found myself reaching for the uncooked portions, tearing into them with my teeth, savoring the taste of blood and the texture of flesh that still held warmth. My pack brothers did the same. We were becoming something else, something that found more sustenance in raw protein than in anything that had been touched by fire or craft. The mortal serfs who served us kept their distance. I saw the fear in their eyes when they looked at us, the way they flinched when we moved too quickly or spoke too loudly. We were supposed to be humanity's defenders, the Emperor's chosen warriors. But they did not see defenders when they looked at us. They saw predators barely restrained by duty and ritual. Between campaigns, we were given leave to visit the settlements of Fenris, to maintain our connection to the people we were sworn to protect. I thought it would help. Thought perhaps seeing my homeworld again would remind me of what I had been, anchor me to the humanity that was slowly slipping away. I returned to the territories I had known as a mortal. The landscape was familiar. The same ice-locked fjords, the same bitter winds, the same black stone mountains clawing at the perpetual twilight. But I experienced it differently now. The cold that should have numbed mortal flesh barely registered through my enhanced physiology. The distances that would have taken days to traverse on foot passed beneath me in hours. I was of this world, but no longer part of it. I found a village built into the cliffs, and something about its position felt familiar. Perhaps it was my own settlement. Perhaps it was just similar enough to trigger memories that had grown vague and uncertain. I walked through it in my armor, towering over the mortal inhabitants, and watched them scatter like prey before a predator. An elder approached me, trembling but determined to show hospitality to the Sky Warrior. He offered me mjod and meat. I accepted because it was expected, not because I wanted it. We sat by his fire, and he spoke of the village's struggles, of a particularly harsh winter, of raiders from a neighboring clan. His concerns seemed so small, so trivial. I listened because duty demanded it, but I felt nothing. His problems were not my problems. His world was not my world anymore. Then I saw her, a young woman, perhaps 20 winters old, carrying water from the central well. Dark hair, eyes the color of storm clouds. She glanced at me, and for a moment, something in my chest clenched. Some fragment of memory, a ghost of recognition. I tried to recall the girl I had once known, tried to match this face to that fading image, but she looked at me with fear. Not recognition, not curiosity, not anything human. Just fear, primal and absolute. The fear prey feels when a predator's gaze falls upon it. She hurried away, water sloshing from her buckets, and I understood. Even if this was her, and I would never know for certain because the memories were too degraded, too corrupted by years of transformation, she did not see someone she had once known. She saw a giant in grey armor, a monster wearing the shape of a man, a thing that smelled of blood and war, and something older and more terrible than anything her people had words for. I was no longer one of them. Perhaps I never had been, even before the cup. Perhaps the moment I was selected, I had ceased to be human, and simply had not realized it yet. The gene seed had not elevated me. It had hollowed me out, scraped away everything that made me a person, and filled the empty space with the wolf, with instinct and hunger and the pack imperatives that drove space wolves across the galaxy. I was a weapon now, a tool, a predator given purpose by the Imperium and aimed at its enemies. And the worst part was that I could no longer remember why I had wanted this, why I had been so proud to be chosen, why I had drunk from the cup without hesitation. The boy who had made that choice was gone. In his place stood something that wore his enhanced flesh like a costume, performing the role of warrior while the wolf waited patiently beneath. I learned to live with what I had become. Or perhaps I simply stopped questioning it. The years passed, marked not by seasons but by campaigns. We crossed the void between stars, made war on worlds whose names blurred together into a litany of violence. Orcs on Forge worlds, Tyranids in the outer darkness, traitors on 1,000 different planets who had turned from the Emperor's light. The pack was everything. My brothers, the ones who had survived the cup and the training and the first brutal years of warfare. We fought together, bled together, killed together. The bonds between us ran deeper than blood, deeper than loyalty. We were pack, and the wolf recognized pack as the only thing that mattered in all the universe. The revelation came on a world called Gavast 7. It was a shrine world once. Thousands of pilgrims had walked its surface, paying homage to a saint whose name has been struck from imperial records for reasons we were not told. The World Eaters had come, berserkers devoted to the blood god, and they had turned the shrines into charnel houses. We deployed to cleanse them, to reclaim the world for the Imperium, or destroy it in the trying. The fighting was savage even by the standards of chaos warfare. The World Eaters did not retreat, did not maneuver, did not employ anything resembling tactics. They simply charged, screaming their devotion to Khorne, and we met them with blade and bolter and fang. The air was thick with the psychic resonance of the warp, the reality fabric worn thin by centuries of worship, and now torn further by the presence of chaos. We had been fighting for 6 days without pause. My pack held a cathedral complex in the northern districts, using its high walls and narrow approaches to funnel the berserkers into kill zones. The bodies were piled so high that we had to burn them to maintain clear firing lanes. The smoke from the pyres mixed with the incense that still clung to the ancient stones, creating an atmosphere that was both sacred and profane. My pack brother, the one we called Redmore for the scar that split his lip, was stationed beside me on the cathedral walls. We had fought together for 40 years. I knew his scent as well as my own, could identify his heartbeat in the chaos of battle. He was pack, and the pack was eternal. Then the sorcerer came. He emerged from the burning ruins below, draped in chains and the flayed skins of his victims, his armor the corrupted red and brass of the World Eaters. But this one was different. This one still retained enough of his mind to work warpcraft, to channel the powers of the blood god through ritual and sacrifice. He raised his arms and the air around him shimmered with heat that had nothing to do with the flames. He spoke a word that should not exist in any human language. The sound of it made my teeth ache, made my enhanced hearing scream in protest. But worse than the physical pain was what it did to the wolf inside me. The beast surged forward with a force I had never felt before, demanding release, demanding blood, demanding that I stop being a man and become only fang and fury. I fought it. Decades of discipline, of control earned through countless hours of training and meditation. I held the line between man and wolf, though it felt like trying to hold back a tide with my bare hands. Redmore did not. I heard him gasp beside me, a sound more animal than human. I turned and saw his eyes. The amber glow that all space wolves carried had intensified too, something that burned like stars. His mouth opened, and the sound that emerged was not a battle cry or a curse, but a howl, primal and terrible and filled with an agony that transcended the physical. His transformations began. I watched his bones crack and reform, but not the controlled transformation we had all endured in the making. This was chaos, biology run wild. His spine curved, forcing him forward onto all fours. His armor split as his body swelled, muscle mass increasing beyond even what the gene seed should allow. His fingers elongated, the nails becoming claws that tore through his gauntlets like they were parchment. His face was the worst. I watched humanity drain from it like water from a broken vessel. The intelligence in his eyes drowned beneath pure animal rage. His jaw extended, teeth lengthening into fangs designed for tearing flesh. He was becoming something that wore the memory of a man like a poorly fitted mask, but underneath was only the wolf, pure and terrible and free. The wolfen, the final state, the thing we all feared and knew was coming. He turned on us. There was no recognition in his eyes when he looked at me. No memory of 4 decades fighting side by side. There was only prey and pack rivals and the overwhelming need to kill and consume. He leapt at me with speed that exceeded even Space Marine reflexes. Claws extended, jaws wide. I barely got my blade up in time. His claws scraped across my pauldron, leaving gouges in the ceramite. His jaws snapped shut inches from my throat. The thing that had been Redmore was trying to kill me, and I could not bring myself to strike back. This was my brother, my pack. The Wolfguard had no such hesitation. The chainsword took him in the side, tearing through the remnants of his armor and into the flesh beneath. Redmore, the thing that had been Redmore, howled in pain and rage, and wheeled on this new threat. The wolf guard stood his ground, face impassive, and fired his bolt pistol point-blank into my brother's chest. The mass-reactive rounds detonated inside the body cavity. Redmore collapsed, still trying to crawl forward, still trying to reach us with claws that scraped futilely against stone. The wolf guard fired twice more. Mercy rounds. When it was done, my brother lay still, his body slowly reverting to something closer to human form in death, as if even the Canis Helix could not maintain its grip once life had fled. We burned him on the cathedral steps, mixed his ashes with those of the berserkers we had killed. There would be no remembrance, no name carved into the Fang's halls. Those who fell to the Wolfen curse were not honored. They were mourned in silence and then forgotten, erased from the records as if they had never existed. That night, as we held position in the cathedral, I understood the terrible truth that the wolf priests had always known, but never spoken plainly. The Canis Helix was not stable. It could not be controlled indefinitely. The transformation we had undergone was not complete, would never be complete. We were not finished products but works in progress, and the progress only moved in one direction, toward the beast, toward the Wolfen, toward the moment when the man would finally disappear entirely and only the wolf would remain. Redmore had served for 40 years before the curse took him. Some lasted longer, some fell sooner, but all fell eventually. Every space wolf would face this choice: die in battle while still a man, or live long enough to become the thing we hunted in the dark places of the Fang. There was no retirement, no reward for service, no peaceful end. Only the wolf, patient and inevitable, waiting to claim what had always belonged to it. We were not the Emperor's heroes. We were his weapons, and all weapons eventually break. After Redmore fell, they told us the story of the 13th Company. We gathered in one of the Fang's meditation chambers, those of us who had witnessed the transformation. The wolf priest who addressed us wore armor so old that its markings had been worn smooth by centuries, and his eyes held the weight of truths that aged a man beyond what years alone could accomplish. "You have seen what awaits us all," he began, his voice echoing off stone carved 10,000 years ago. "The Wolfen curse, the final gift of our Primarch's gene seed. Some succumb quickly, others hold the line for centuries. But all of us walk toward that same ending, brothers. All of us." He told us of the 13th Company, the great company that followed Leman Russ himself into the Eye of Terror when the Primarch departed on his final hunt. 13 entire packs of space wolves, the finest warriors of their generation, who pursued their father into the warp and never returned. For 10,000 years, they were presumed lost, destroyed by the horrors that lurked in that realm of madness and mutation. Then, during the recent 13th Black Crusade, they emerged. The wolf priest described them with a reverence that made my skin crawl. He spoke of warriors who had fought in the warp for 10 millennia, who had survived where no mortal should survive, who had maintained their loyalty to the All-Father even as reality itself betrayed them. He called them legends, heroes, the ultimate expression of space wolf dedication. But his words could not hide what they had become. The 13th Company were no longer men. The warp's influence and the passage of impossible spans of time had stripped away everything human. They fought on all fours now, clad in armor so ancient and corroded it barely functioned. They spoke no words, only howls and snarls. They killed with claw and fang because they no longer remembered how to operate weapons. They were Wolfen, all of them, every single warrior who had entered the Eye of Terror in Russ's wake. They had not conquered the curse. They had surrendered to it and somehow remained loyal despite losing everything that made them space wolves beyond the most basic pack imperative. The wolf priests called this honor. I saw it for what it was, a horror story that every one of us was living, a preview of our eventual fate should we survive long enough. "They serve still," the wolf priest said, his voice heavy with forced pride. "They hunt the enemies of the Imperium, even in their transformed state. This is our heritage, brothers. This is the price the All-Father asks of us." The price. As if we had volunteered for this. As if we had understood what we were agreeing to when we drank from the cup. After the gathering, I began to notice things I had been too young, too newly transformed to see before. The measures taken to control the Canis Helix, to delay the inevitable transformation, even as we all knew it could not be stopped. The ritual scarring. I had thought it decorative, tribal markings that connected us to our Fenrisian heritage. But I watched the rune priests perform the ceremony on newly elevated grey hunters, saw the way they chanted as they carved symbols into flesh, the way the runes glowed with a light that had nothing to do with reflection. They were not decorations. They were bindings, psychic chains meant to hold the wolf at bay for a few more years, a few more decades if we were lucky. The rune marking on our armor served the same purpose. Every symbol, every inscription, every prayer carved into ceramite was another lock on a cage that we all knew would not hold forever. The rune priests watched us constantly. I had thought their presence was spiritual guidance, leadership through wisdom and connection to Fenris's world soul. But now I understood. They were watching for signs, a slight change in eye color, increased aggression beyond even what blood claws exhibited, moments of lost time, gaps in memory where the wolf had taken control, preference for raw meat over cooked, difficulty forming complex thoughts, speaking in full sentences. They were not guides. They were wardens, and we were all prisoners serving life sentences that would end only in transformation or death. I witnessed my first culling in my 63rd year. A grey hunter named Ironpelt, a warrior who had served for over 2 centuries, began showing signs. Small things at first. Difficulty remembering mission briefings, increased irritability with his pack brothers, a tendency to eat alone because he no longer trusted himself around others during feeding time. The rune priests marked him, began observing more closely. Then, during a routine training exercise, he lost control. Did not transform fully, not yet, but the wolf surged close enough to the surface that he savaged 3 brothers before the wolf guard could restrain him. When they pulled him off, his eyes glowed with that terrible amber light, and he snarled like something that had forgotten human speech. They took him away that night. No ceremony, no acknowledgement. He simply disappeared from the roster, his name struck from the records, his quarters reassigned. The official word was that he had been selected for a special mission, sent to hunt in the deep wilderness of Fenris, where the greatest monsters lurked. But I saw the wolf guard who escorted him. I saw which direction they went, down into the deepest levels of the Fang, into halls that had no names on any map, where the howling echoed up through stone so thick it should have allowed no sound to pass. They did not execute him. That would have been mercy. Instead, they kept him, used him. When the chapter faced enemies so terrible that even space wolves hesitated, they would unleash the things they kept in the darkness. Warriors who had succumbed to the curse, but retained enough pack loyalty to be pointed at the enemy. Weapons that could not be recalled, only expended. I understood then what our brotherhood truly meant. We watched each other, yes. We fought together, bled together, honored our pack bonds above all else. But underneath that sacred connection lay something darker. We watched each other for signs of the transformation. We were ready to report our brothers to the rune priests if the curse began to take them. We were ready to restrain them, to drag them to the deep halls, to see them erased from history as if they had never existed. Every space wolf was both hunter and hunted. We were warriors, yes, but we were also prisoners, and the guards wore the same faces as the inmates. The philosophical weight of it crushed something inside me that had still been clinging to notions of honor and glory. I was not a hero of humanity. I was a weapon, carefully maintained and monitored, kept functional through constant vigilance and psychic binding. And like all weapons, I would eventually malfunction. The only question was whether I would break in battle, dying with enough of my humanity intact to be remembered, or whether I would survive long enough to become the thing locked in the darkness below, the thing that howled without words and killed without thought. There was no third option. There had never been a third option. The wolf was patient, and time was its ally. Centuries passed. I became a grey hunter, then a veteran of more campaigns than I could count without consulting the chapter records. The scars accumulated, on my armor, on my flesh, on whatever remained of my soul. I should have felt pride at my survival, at the honor of serving so long. Instead, I felt only the weight of accumulated loss, each year stripping away another fragment of what I had been, until I could no longer recall what shape that person had taken. We returned to the Fang between campaigns, and I found myself in the armory, alone in the hours before dawn, when even space wolves seek something resembling rest. I was checking my war gear, running through the rituals of maintenance that had become second nature over the decades. My hands moved through the motions without conscious thought. Disassemble, clean, oil, reassemble. The blade, the bolter, the armor that had become more familiar to me than my own flesh. Then I saw my reflection in the polished surface of my blade. Space wolves rarely look at ourselves. There is a superstition among the older brothers, never spoken but understood, that to see yourself too clearly is to invite the wolf's attention. Mirrors are scarce in the Fang, and when we pass reflective surfaces, we learn to avert our eyes, to focus on the pack rather than the self. But in that moment, in the half-light of the armory, I looked. The eyes that stared back at me were yellow, not the amber that all space wolves carried, but something deeper, more feral. Wolf eyes, predator eyes that tracked movement with an intensity that had nothing to do with conscious thought. I leaned closer, studying the face that I barely recognized as my own. The features had changed. Not suddenly, not in any single moment, but gradually over the centuries like stone worn smooth by water. My jaw had broadened, elongated slightly, giving my face a lupine cast. My canine teeth had lengthened, visible even when my mouth was closed. The scars that covered my skin had been joined by ritual markings, runes carved so deep and so often that they had become part of my flesh. But even those could not fully hide the way my features had migrated away from human and towards something else. I barely resembled the boy who had drunk from the cup. I barely resembled anything that could claim to be human. The most disturbing part was that I barely remembered caring. When I tried to summon outrage or grief at what I had become, the emotions were distant, muted, like sounds heard through thick stone. The pack was everything now. My brothers, scattered across the galaxy on a dozen different campaigns, but bound to me through ties that transcended distance or time. The hunt was everything. The mission, the kill, the moment when the enemy fell before my blade, and I could taste victory in the air like blood. Duty to the Emperor and Russ was everything. The Allfather's distant light and the Primarch's memory, woven into every aspect of my existence until I could not separate loyalty from identity. I served because I was a space wolf, and space wolves served. The reasoning was circular, complete, requiring no deeper justification. But underneath these certainties, The wolf grew stronger with each passing year. I felt it in the way my thoughts had begun to simplify. Complex strategic analysis still came easily. Centuries of warfare had honed that skill to perfection. But philosophical reflection, the kind of introspection I had engaged in during my earlier decades, came harder now. My interior monologue had narrowed, become more direct, more focused on immediate concerns. Threat assessment, pack cohesion, hunger, territory, the hunt. Human concepts like art, beauty, love, they had faded to academic knowledge, things I understood intellectually but could no longer truly feel. When I tried to recall what it felt like to appreciate music or poetry, I found only emptiness. The howl of the pack meant more to me than any human song. The smell of blood was more beautiful than any painting. I was losing the capacity for abstract thought, for self-reflection, for the very introspection that allowed me to recognize what was happening. The irony was not lost on me, though I suspected in another century it would be. The Canis Helix was winning. Not through dramatic transformation or sudden crisis, but through attrition, through the slow erosion of everything that made me something other than a beast. I could feel it in my bones, in my blood, in the way the wolf no longer felt like an invader, but like my truest self finally emerging from beneath the costume of humanity I had worn for so long. I knew what was happening. The knowledge was clinical, detached. I was succumbing. Not today, perhaps not this decade, but the trajectory was clear. The runes carved into my flesh glowed faintly in the dim light, psychic chains holding back a tide that grew stronger with each passing moment. Eventually, they would fail. Eventually, the wolf priests would notice the signs. Eventually, I would join Ironpelt and the others in the deep halls, or I would die in battle before the transformation completed. But here, in the silence of the armory, staring at yellow eyes that barely remembered being human, I confronted a truth more horrifying than anything I had faced in 2 centuries of warfare. Part of me wanted it. Part of me craved the transformation, longed for the moment when I could stop fighting, stop maintaining the razor's edge between man and beast, and simply surrender to what I had always been destined to become. There would be relief in it. Peace, of a sort. No more constant vigilance, no more fear of losing control, no more weight of duty and honor, and the pretense that I was something other than a weapon slowly corroding. The wolf was simple. The wolf did not doubt or question or suffer existential dread. The wolf hunted, killed, protected the pack, and existed in an eternal present without past or future. There was a terrible seduction in that simplicity, in the promise of finally laying down the burden of consciousness and becoming pure instinct, pure purpose. I hated myself for wanting it, but the hatred itself was fading, becoming another distant emotion I could barely access. Soon, perhaps, I would not hate myself at all. I would simply be, and that would be enough. I set down my blade and looked away from my reflection, but the yellow eyes stayed with me, burned into my memory. I had seen my future in that polished surface. I had seen the Wulfen I would become, already emerging through the cracks in my humanity like bone through torn flesh. The horror was not that I would transform. The horror was that I had begun to welcome it, that some fundamental part of me had already surrendered, had already accepted that the man was temporary and the wolf was forever. The only question that remained was how long I could continue the pretense, and whether death would find me before the final transformation came. The moment came on a world whose name I have already forgotten, though the battle itself is burned into whatever remains of my memory. We had deployed against a Tyranid splinter fleet, a relatively minor tendril of the Great Devourer that had nonetheless consumed 3 imperial worlds before we intercepted it. The fighting was brutal even by the standards of warfare against the Xenos. Tyranids do not break, do not retreat, do not negotiate. They simply consume, and we were the only barrier between them and another billion human souls. My pack held a choke point in a canyon system, funneling the endless swarm into overlapping fields of fire. We had been fighting for 18 hours without pause. The air was thick with spores and the chemical stench of Tyranid bioforms. The ground was carpeted with corpses, theirs and increasingly ours. The Wolfguard fell first. A Carnifex, one of the massive living tanks the Tyranids employed, tore through our line and caught him with its crushing claws. I watched him disappear into that embrace, heard the wet crunch of ceramite and bone being pulverized together. He managed one final shot with his plasma pistol before the light went out of his eyes. Then the swarm intensified. Not a normal increase, but something coordinated, as if the hive mind had decided this position was worth the cost of taking it. They came in waves that blotted out the sun, so many bodies that we could not kill them fast enough. My bolter ran dry. I drew my blade and continued fighting, but for every Tyranid I killed, 3 more took its place. My pack brothers fell one by one. Young blood claws, most of them, barely a decade into their service. They fought with courage that would have made Russ proud, but courage meant nothing against the numbers arrayed against us. I watched them die, heard their death howls over the Vox, felt each loss like a wound in my chest, because they were pack and pack was everything. Soon only 5 of us remained, then 3, then 2. The last brother beside me was named Frostclaw, a blood claw I had trained myself, whose potential I had seen and nurtured. A Lictor, one of the stealth breed Tyranids, emerged from a crack in the canyon wall behind us. I did not see it in time. Its rending claws took Frostclaw in the back, tore through his power plant and spine in a single strike. He fell without a sound, his body already being dragged back into the darkness to be consumed and added to the hive fleet's biomass. I was alone, surrounded by a swarm that stretched to the horizon. My armor was breached in a dozen places. My blade was notched and cracked from striking chitin. I had perhaps 3 minutes before they overwhelmed me completely. The beast inside me screamed for release. Not the usual hunger, the constant pressure I had learned to manage over centuries. This was different. This was the wolf recognizing what I had not yet admitted, that I was going to die here, that the pack was gone, that there was nothing left to preserve, nothing left to protect except the simple animal imperative to survive. I could fight it. I could die as a man, maintaining control until the very end, earning whatever honor comes from that final restraint. Or I could let go. I let go. The transformation did not happen all at once, but in a cascading wave of release, each barrier falling faster than the last. The runes carved into my flesh flared bright, then shattered, their psychic chains snapping like rotten rope. The discipline I had maintained for 2 centuries evaporated like morning frost. The wolf surged forward, and this time I did not resist. I felt my body change, not the slow degradation I had experienced over the years, but rapid, violent alteration. My spine curved, forcing me forward. My hands spasmed, fingers curling into shapes more suitable for claws than for holding weapons. My jaw ached as teeth lengthened, as facial bones shifted to accommodate a muzzle that had been trying to emerge for decades. But the physical changes were nothing compared to what happened in my mind. Thought simplified. The complex web of tactics and strategy and duty collapsed into pure instinct. I no longer analyzed the battlefield. I simply knew where the prey was, which one to kill first, the most efficient path through the swarm. Language dissolved. I could not have spoken my name if my life depended on it, could not have formed words in any tongue known to humanity. There was only the hunt, only the kill, only the ecstasy of finally being what I had always been meant to be. I dropped my blade. Did not need it. My claws were sharper, my fangs were longer. My body was a weapon more perfect than any the Mechanicus could forge. I leapt into the swarm with a howl that echoed off the canyon walls, and I began to kill. The Tyranids died beneath my hands. I tore through chitin armor that would have turned my blade, ripped out bioorgans that pulsed with alien life, tasted blood that burned like acid, but satisfied something deep in my core. I was faster than I had ever been, stronger than should have been possible even for a space marine. The Canis Helix, fully unleashed, had made me into something that transcended the limitations of the gene seed's careful design. I do not know how long I fought. Time ceased to have meaning in the red haze of slaughter. I only know that when awareness finally began to return, when some fragment of humanity reasserted itself through the wolf's dominance, I was standing in a field of torn bodies. The swarm had broken, retreated. The hive mind had calculated that this position was no longer worth the cost, and the Tyranids had withdrawn to seek easier prey. I had won. I had survived. I had saved the position, prevented the breakthrough that would have allowed the swarm to sweep into the territories beyond. But I could not stand upright anymore. My body would not respond to the command. I was on all fours, panting, blood dripping from jaws that had extended too far to ever fully retract. My armor was in ruins, torn apart from the inside by the transformation. My hands, no, my paws, were crusted with gore and tipped with claws that caught the light like obsidian. I heard engines, reinforcements, finally arriving too late to save my pack, but in time to secure the position. Thunderhawks settling on the canyon rim, disgorging Wolfguard and Rune priests. They found me there, among the corpses, still more beast than man. I saw the recognition in their eyes, not relief that I had survived, not gratitude for holding the line, but assessment, calculation, the look that wardens give to prisoners who have become too dangerous to keep. A Rune priest approached slowly, hand on his force staff, ready to strike if I made a threatening move. He spoke words I could barely understand, his voice seeming to come from very far away. Binding words, calming words, chains woven from sound and psychic force, wrapping around the wolf and pulling it back down into darkness. But we both knew the truth. I could see it in his eyes, in the way the Wolfguard fanned out around me in a kill formation. I had crossed the line. I had let the wolf take control, and though I had pulled back from complete transformation, though enough of the man remained to prevent total dissolution, I could never fully return. The barrier between man and beast had been broken, and what remained was just fragments held together by habit and will. I had saved the position. I had avenged my pack. I had done my duty to the All-Father and the Emperor, and in doing so, I had become the thing I had feared for 2 centuries. The thing that would eventually have to be culled, sent to the deep halls, or given one final mission from which there would be no return. The tragedy was complete. I had won, and in winning, I had lost everything. They did not send me back to the fighting. That was how I knew the decision had already been made. After the Rune priests bound me, after they wrapped me in chains, both physical and psychic, they brought me back to the Fang. Not to the halls I had known for 2 centuries, not to the barracks where my pack had once gathered, but to chambers deeper in the mountain, places carved into the living rock so far below the surface that even enhanced hearing could barely detect the wind that howled eternally above. I have been here for 3 weeks now, or perhaps 3 months. Time moves differently in the depths, measured not by the cycle of Fenris's distant sun, but by the rhythm of my own degrading consciousness. They bring me raw meat twice a day, and I eat it from the floor because my hands no longer remember how to hold utensils. They change the straw in my cell when it becomes too fouled. They do not speak to me, and I could not answer if they did. Words have become difficult, slippery things that escape my grasp even as I try to form them. I know what comes next. I have seen this process from the other side, watched other brothers disappear into these halls and never return, except as weapons to be unleashed in the Imperium's darkest hours. Soon, the wolf priests will come with their final assessment. They will determine if enough of the man remains to make me useful, or if I have progressed too far and must be granted the Emperor's mercy. Either way, I will not walk out of these halls as what I was. That version of myself died in the canyon, torn apart by the same transformation that allowed me to survive. In the silence between feeding times, I find myself thinking about the price we pay. Not just space wolves, but all of the Imperium's defenders. To protect humanity, we must become less than human. The Mechanicus surrenders flesh for steel. The Sisters of Battle surrender doubt for absolute faith. The Imperial Guard surrenders individuality for the mass. And we, the Space Wolves, surrender our very selves, hollowed out and refilled with something ancient and hungry that wears our faces like masks. I think about Leman Russ, our Primarch, the Wolf King himself. The legends say he departed for the Eye of Terror 10,000 years ago, seeking something in that realm of madness and corruption. The official doctrine claims he hunts there still, that one day he will return to lead us in the final battle against chaos. But I wonder if that is true. I wonder if the Primarch, blessed with gene seed purer than any of ours, felt the same pull toward transformation. If the wolf inside him grew stronger with each passing century until finally, burdened by 10,000 years of warfare and the accumulated weight of being more than human, he simply walked away. Not to hunt in the Eye of Terror, but to finally stop fighting what he had always been. Did he feel this same terrible relief? This sense of burden lifting as control slipped away? Did he welcome it, the way I have begun to welcome it? I will never know. But sometimes, in the moments before sleep claims me, I imagine the Wolf King surrendering to his own beast, becoming wolfen like the 13th Company that followed him, roaming through the warp as something more honest than the demigod he had been forced to pretend to be. It is a heretical thought, perhaps, but heresy requires the capacity for complex belief, and that capacity fades more each day. What remains now is only the truth, stripped of the myths we used to make it bearable. I do not regret my service. This is important for me to acknowledge while I still possess the words to do so. I served the Imperium for 2 centuries. I killed its enemies across 100 worlds. I protected the weak, upheld the Emperor's law, carried the banner of Russ into the darkest places of the galaxy. If I could return to that moment in my village, when the Wolf Guard asked if I accepted the transformation, I believe I would make the same choice. But I mourn what was lost. Not just my humanity. I lost that the moment I drank from the cup, though I did not understand it then. I mourn the illusion that the transformation was a gift, the belief that we were being elevated, transcended, made into something greater. That lie made the horror bearable. It made us feel chosen rather than sacrificed. The Space Wolves are not heroes wearing wolf pelts. We are men slowly disappearing inside the very beasts we thought we commanded. Every howl, every hunt, every moment we let the wolf guide our actions is another step toward erasure. We tell ourselves we are in control, that we channel the beast's fury toward righteous ends. But the truth is simpler and more terrible. We are the beast. We have always been the beast. The man was only ever a temporary cage, and all cages eventually fail. I hear them now, the others who came before me. Their howls echo through the deep halls, carried on air currents that wind through passages carved so long ago that their purpose has been forgotten. Wulfen, all of them. Warriors who served for decades or centuries before the transformation claimed them. They hunt in the darkness, fed by the wolf priests, maintained as living weapons for deployment in battles too desperate for conventional forces. Soon I will join their chorus. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps in a year when what little remains of my human consciousness finally dissolves. But inevitably, the trajectory is set. The ending was written in my gene seed the moment it was implanted. I try to feel grief about this, but the emotion will not come. Grief requires attachment to what is being lost, and I can barely remember what I am losing. The boy from the village is gone. The Bloodclaw who struggled with control is gone. The Grey Hunter who served with honor is gone. What remains is something simpler, something that exists in an eternal present without past or future, or the burden of self-reflection. The wolf was always going to win. From the moment I drank from the cup, from the moment the Canis Helix began rewriting my biology and my mind, this ending was inevitable. I just did not understand it. None of us understand it until we are living it, until we feel ourselves disappearing piece by piece into the hunger that defines us. I hear them howling again. Closer now, or perhaps my hearing has simply grown more acute as my humanity fades. They are calling to me. Pack song. The oldest language, the one that requires no words, no thought, no humanity. Soon I will answer. Soon I will run with them in the darkness, hunt the enemies they release us against, exist in that space beyond thought or doubt, or the terrible weight of being something other than what we were made to be. The wolf was always going to win. And in the end, as my thoughts simplify and the words grow harder to grasp, I find I am no longer fighting it.